Okay, ladies and gentlemen, this video is going to go through creating basic shapes for use of laser engraving or laser cutting. So, for today's example video, we're going to be working exclusively in Adobe Illustrator. So to begin with, we're going to create a new document. And just like in previous videos, we're going to look at making sure that we are using the units of measurement that we want to use for the object that we are going to be engraving or cutting into, as well as we want to make sure that we have measured the design size of the object we are going to be creating or engraving into. So for today's example, I'm going to make a simple shape to make a coaster. So I have to have measured the cup or can or drink vessel that I'm going to be using this coaster for, and that's given me a size of 3 inches. So I'm going to set my width as well as my height to 3 inches. I'll hit create, and this is my workspace, and everything should fit exactly into the edges of this design for my coaster. So to begin with, there are many ways that we can make a basic shape in Illustrator. The first is simply using the shape tool. So we have the option of rectangles, where I could draw a simple square, 3 inches by 3 inches. I could choose to draw instead a rectangle, so maybe I didn't want a 3-inch by 3-inch object, but that's not going to work quite well as a coaster. I also have an option of the ellipse tool, where I could draw a 3-inch diameter circle. And I'm just dragging this right to the edge of my document. Another neat trick that you can use with the shapes tools, instead of drawing it and perfectly sizing it, is simply click on your screen once. It'll bring up the shape menu here, and you can type in exactly the size that you want your object to be. So if I set 3 and 3 to height and width, hit OK, there is my circle, and it is exactly 3 inches in diameter. And all I need to do is move it into my workspace so it's centered, and that's ready to go. And as well as in the shape tool, there is the option for polygon. So you can draw out a polygon, resize it how you might want. Now, if you have drawn the shape and you haven't sized it the way you need it, you can always rotate your design too. Okay, and you can free rotate it or hold your shift key and it will snap to preset angles. And once you have rotated your object, placed it, if you need to enlarge it, you can also use the properties menu on the right hand side of your workspace. What you want to do is just pay very close attention to this chain link icon. If it is closed as it is now, when I change one measurement, so for example the width, if I change this to 3, it automatically proportionately resizes the height. Okay, if I want to define these independently, I want to make sure that that lock chain icon is not closed. So now when I go to set the height to 3, it doesn't change the width. And there's my polygon coaster sized up, ready to go. I can also use the align tools on this properties menu to center my design onto my workspace. And I can also rotate from here should I want to. It's actually just positioned my design up top. I'm going to take it back down so it's in the center point. And the reason it's pivoted it the way it has is if you look beside my width and height, my angle, is there's these X and Y coordinates as well as these 9 little squares. And these squares reference to the squares on the actual object when you have it selected. So right now the top left corner is selected, which means that when I rotate it, it's rotating as a pivot point, this top left corner. If I set the center square and I rotated this 30, it's simply rotating on the center axis of the object. Beyond that, the star tool for drawing out a star, similar to with the polygon. Once you've drawn it out, you can rotate it into position. Once you've got it rotated, you can even type in specific angles or specific sizes. And you can even type in specific locations. So if you know that this is a 3-inch by 3-inch shape, 3-inch by 3-inch workspace, and I have the center spot selected, I know that the X and Y values should be half of my 3 inches, so 1.5 inches. And that also allows me to center this design on my workspace. So those are the most basic ways to make a shape in Illustrator for laser engraving or laser cutting if I wanted to cut out the shape to be a coaster as my example was. Now the other thing that I can do is I can free draw designs with the pen tool. And the way I use the pen tool is I simply click and draw lines to make my shapes. And what's really neat with this tool is that if I click and drag, it allows me to make a contoured or curved line for my design. Now, the important thing I have to remember is I need to click on my starting point to close the object. Otherwise, it's an open object and it's not going to work as well for cutting out the shape to be my design or my coaster in this case. Now, if you have a design, for example, something in mind that you can't make with the basic shapes, the pen tool is a really great option to trace out or create that design. And then using the direct selection tool, you can modify the design by clicking on the anchor points and repositioning them, or clicking on a curved anchor point and moving the curved handles to reposition and redistribute the curvature of that line based on your desired design. Now, the last thing I want to show you before we get you into making your own design is there's the ability for you to combine shapes. So let's say, for example, I draw a star. Let's get this back to 270. Let's get this back to 3 inches by 3 inches. And let's get this back so it's centered on my workspace. Now I have my star, but maybe inside my star, I want to have a circle. Maybe I want that circle to be 1 inch by 1 inch. I'm going to put that in the middle. Now, right now, these are two independent objects, which in terms of how we see it on the screen, works perfectly fine. But in terms of using the laser, this is actually going to cause some problems. It's not going to properly cut these out. We need to join these together to make it a new shape. So the way I'm going to visually make this easier to see is I'm going to take the star and I'm going to set the fill under the properties menu to be red. And I'm going to take the circle and I'm going to make its fill be blue, just so we have some good contrast to see the differences. So what I can do is reposition my circle. So maybe I want it to look a little bit more like it's in the center of the star and less like it's in the center of the screen. So evenly distributing it from the points of my star. That looks good. What I can do is in the window menu, search for the pathfinder, and that'll bring up this little menu screen that I've moved over to the right side here. And what this allows me to do is modify or interact with these two shapes in different ways. So what I have is the option to unite these objects together to make a new form, to minus the front layer, to keep the intersecting area, and to remove the intersecting area, as well as things like dividing objects apart, trimming up objects, merging objects together, cropping objects for the overlapping, outlining the objects, or minusing the back. So if I want to turn my circle into a hole from my star, I select my circle, I hold the Shift key and select my star, and now the circle is the second thing that I drew, which means it's the top layer. It's why I can see it on top of my star. If I had drawn my circle first and then my star second, I wouldn't actually see my circle. The star would cover it up. But that means that the circle is the front. So if I want to cut it out from the star, I use the minus front. And now it's taken my blue circle and turned it into a white hole because it's now removed from the star shape. Now, if I wanted to also make another design alteration to this, let's say I take a square here and I'm just going to draw this in. I'll resize this. Let's make this a 1 inch by 1 inch square. And let's position this so that it's almost looking like it's turning my star into like a rocket or something here. And we'll position this on my star. If I select both these objects, choose the Unite tool, it's now merged these together. Okay, and this has now become my new design object. And this is one shape set together. Now, if I, again, further modify this, I can use my direct selection tool. I can bring that anchor point of the corner in so that it just, again, plays with the design I can take the anchor points out and just, again, further modify how my design is going to appear in its final form for something a little bit more unique. I could also, let's put a polygon in here. Let's put the polygon so that it is the overlapping area, but not completely overlapping. If I take both of these objects that I've now made and use that intersect, you'll notice that only the area that overlapped between my deformed star and my polygon is what remains. And if I use that final exclude, it removes the overlapping area but keeps the other portion of the polygon and my deformed star intact. So that's how I can use the Pathfinder tool in a few different ways to make some shapes. That's the way that I can make designs with the pen tool. Now, in terms of preparing something for the laser, I'm just going to use a basic circle to show you what the basic steps are required for making this laser engraving ready. So I'm going to remove the Pathfinder tool window. I've drawn my circle in, I've centered it on my document. I'm going to get my selection tool here. What's important for this is, again, you have to define what it is that you're doing with the engraver. So as of right now, I have a black line, which could be engraved into the material of my choice. I have a red circle, which can also be engraved into the surface or of my material of my choice. Or I could cut this shape out. And I had said earlier that I wanted to make this as a coaster for my example. So that means I need to cut this shape out of a piece of material. In order for cutting to occur properly, what I need to do is ensure that I choose my fill for the shape to be no fill, which is this red line through the white box. And I need to ensure that my stroke is a color other than black or white. So I'm going to choose red. And the thickness of that stroke has to be 0.25 of a point. So it's very, very thin. If I don't set my stroke to that thin of a setting, the laser will actually recognize the outside edge of the line and the inside edge of the line as something to engrave or to cut, and it's going to try and cut relatively in the same exact point twice. The same thing will occur is if I keep the shape's fill to a color, it will define the edge of that color fill as an area to cut and the outside of the stroke as an area to cut. So the simplest way to keep this nice and clean and organized is to set the fill to no fill, set the stroke to a color so that it's defined as something other than black in the laser, and keeping it as thin as possible, which for this program is 0.25 of a point. And it would be the same thing if I was using a design that I drew with the pen tool. It'd be the same if I used any of these other shapes, or if I had played around with the Pathfinder tool and made some unique design that I then wanted to cut out of my material. If I wanted to engrave this, playing with that stroke thickness would just define the amount of material that would get engraved. So this area here, everything that's red, would be the engraved area of this design now. If I simply kept it at that 0.25, that very thin space is what would be engraved. If I set the stroke to no stroke and set the fill to be a color, for example, black, everything on the screen here that's black would be my engraved area. So I'd have a giant 3-inch engraved circle on my workpiece. All right, ladies and gentlemen, I would like you to play around with these things. Try a few things with the pen tool. Trace a design, create an original design, play with the shapes, create something. And I would like to see some examples also of using the Pathfinder tool. And what I would like you to create is one design with the pen tool, one design with a basic shape, and one design using a combination of shapes and pen tool with the Pathfinder tool as well. So you're actually going to be submitting 3 different designs using the different ways to create simple shapes for Adobe Illustrator to be used with the laser engraver for cutting or engraving. When you are finished each of your designs, make sure you save as, give it a name. So you can call this shape 1, shape 2, shape 3, based on which design it is that you're doing. Make sure it is an Adobe Illustrator file. And after saving it, make sure it is an Illustrator 2021 version. And again, all 3 of your designs are going to simple shape. All right, ladies and gentlemen, pitter patter.